to the Q&A Cafe. And you at home, you here at the Georgetown Club. It's great to have all of us here today with Sally Quinn, who finally arrived. And may I just say, Sally, since you were coming from the railroad station and you had to, or train station, and you had to get here, and you said you were on your way, I had faith.
Well, that's the way. But I didn't.
No.
There was a moment.
Well, I mean,
I did have a great tour of downtown Washington.
You did, and she was texting me about her driver, who she felt wasn't quite up to the job, and I couldn't help but wanting to text her back, given some of the publicity that's come out of your book and some of the revelations in your book about hexes. I really was prompted to say, just don't put a hex on him. We need you to get here.
The poor guy, I wouldn't think
I
of
know,
it.
I know, but you're here.
And I don't do that anymore, besides.
I know, you did give it up.
I gave it
with
up,
good
yeah.
reason. But you're here, and we're happy to have you. It's actually your third time at the Q&A Cafe.
That's right, yeah.
And I was thinking back, some of you may have been at Sally's previous two appearances. One was by yourself for one of your earlier books. And then one which I just is still one of my favorite shows, which I share with people whenever I can, was when you appeared with Quinn and Ben, the whole family, and for Quinn's book.
Right.
That was
a different life.
Yeah, and it was what I loved about that interview is I've always said to people that I felt that if you wanted to know the dynamic of the Ben Bradley, Sally Quinn, Quinn Bradley matrix, just watch that interview, because I really felt you were all being yourselves, complete with Ben sort of over here on the side, every now and then just letting you and Quinn just kind of have at it. So. But here you are now, and your life has gone through so many more changes since then, and not the least of which was producing this book. And you worked on it a long time.
Well, actually, I got a book contract
way back
11 years ago. I started the religion website 11 years
on
ago.
Faith.
On Faith. For the Washington Post, and it turned out to be very successful. And I was an atheist when I started it.
I thought you were.
Well, I had come at it in sort of a backward way, because I thought that the religion was a huge story and that we weren't covering religion. And I thought it was important both for foreign policy and national politics. And so I went to Don Graham, and he said, why don't you start a religion website? And I said, I don't know anything about religion. I don't know anything about the internet. And he said, nobody's perfect. So I did start the website with my friend John Meacham, who was a Newsweek editor and great pal of mine. And he's a religion scholar. He had the street cred. I had none. But anyway, it took off, and so sometime along the way, a friend of mine who runs Harper One, which is the #1 religion publisher in the world, came to me and asked me if I would do a book about starting a website, being an atheist, and how that all happened, what it meant. And so he kept at me, and I sort of reluctantly signed a contract. And it was shortly after that Ben and what I didn't realize until a couple of weeks ago when I was being interviewed by Bob Woodward and Elsa Walsh, and Elsa said,
that had to be something.
Well, Elsa said, do you realize that the year that you started the website was the year that Ben was diagnosed with dementia? And I didn't realize that, and I put it together. But that comes
across in the book too.
Well, but I didn't. It just never occurred to me that that was the same time, and that obviously I felt like I was losing Ben, and I needed to something.
But the emergence
I needed
of his dementia,
something, with a spiritual
subtle
dimension, which I didn't think I was going for. I thought I was just being a journalist.
Well, you also thought that your marriage had somehow, I'm not hit the rocks, but had hit a real rough patch. You were noticing changes in him. There was a stress in the marriage, but you had no definition for it. So it struck me that you decided that you were going to work on yourself to try to figure it out.
Right. Yeah. Right? Well, I actually my astrologer Caroline Casey is here.
Mine too.
And she is the most brilliant.
Obviously,
person.
we recommend her highly.
And, I mean, Caroline has been reading my charts for 40 years, and I mean, she's extraordinary.
And it works.
And yes, and she's incredible. Without Caroline, I'm nothing.
May have to have Caroline come back and do a show.
I'm doing her radio show today, but Ben, we had this wonderful marriage, and it was this great love affair, and suddenly he's turned hostile. And he was angry, and he was resentful, and he would say things that were verbally abusive to me, and it was so unlike him.
Because it was spontaneous and unexpected, and it couldn't be triggered by something you could define.
And I didn't know where it was coming from, and I was just devastated. Right. So I got the name of a psychiatrist named Stephen Wolin, who was also brilliant. And so we went to see him together. I finally convinced Ben that we needed to go see him together. And Ben really loved him. He's fabulous. And he made Ben feel right at home. But we would have these sessions, and I would say, you know, he did this, and he called me this name, and he hurt my feelings. And Ben would sit there and say, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. I never did that. How could I ever say those things to you? I love you. I would never talk to you that way. And I thought he was, gaslighting me. I just didn't know what was happening.
You certainly weren't thinking dementia.
No.
Yeah.
And neither was Stephen, the shrink. So I didn't know how to handle it. And it finally, at one point, Stephen said, I think that I should see the two of you separately. Mm-hmm. And Ben would go, and he would have these wonderful sessions. He'd come back and say, I love Stephen. It was great fun. It was wonderful talking. And then Stephen would see me, and that's when I started working on myself and realizing that I had to pull myself together. And I remember going to Caroline during that period when it was so stressful. Mm-hmm. And Caroline, and I don't even know whether you saw in his chart that he had dementia, but I do remember you saying to him that you ought to pat him like a horse when he gets that way and just say, there, Ben.
And it worked.
And it worked.
Yeah.
It worked. I mean, instead of being angry at him or responding in a hostile way, I would just say, there, Ben, and then he would calm down. It was sort of magical in a way.
But as you, right, well, and as you point out.
And I suggest that all women do that with their husbands,
Yes. As you point out, though, this coincided with you going into this deeper journey of exploring your own spirituality. And I wonder if that journey prepared you for what was ahead as he descended more deeply into dementia. Because you had to find a self within yourself that could stay strong through his decline.
Well, there was no question about it. And when I first had my first conversation with John Meacham about my being an atheist, Meacham is a devout Christian, and he said, you're not an atheist. And I said, yes, I am. And he said, no, because that's a negative word. And you're not a negative person. It basically means you don't believe in anything.
Right,
it means
void.
Yeah, and it also means that you deny the existence of God. And how can you do that because you don't know? And besides, you're an angry atheist, and how can you be angry at God if you don't believe in God? And
he wasn't the only one who disagreed with you too. The others said you're not an atheist.
Right, but my favorite bumper sticker is, I don't know and you don't either. Which came later, but it was about belief, and I didn't. The word agnosticism didn't mean anything to me because it means you don't know. Well, we're all agnostics. The Pope's an agnostic, Yeah. I mean, he believes, he has faith, but he doesn't know any more than I do. But John gave me a list of books to read, and he said, go read these books about religion and about faith, and then if you then come back and tell me you're an atheist, but don't talk about it if you don't know what you're talking about. And so I did, and I started reading these books about religion and faith, and I was reading books about atheism. I mean, Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett, all the great.
Can I say something interesting about Christopher that you point out in the book and it's so Christopher, that yes, he was a devout atheist, but he read his horoscope.
Every day.
Right. And you found a lot of people who claim to have no faith, you said, that were religiously, if you'll pardon the expression, reading their horoscopes.
Right. Well, and also if he found a penny, he considered it good luck, and he would take it with him. And Richard Dawkins, who was a wild atheist, said he never steps on a crack because he's afraid he'd break his mother's back. And he would never sleep in a haunted house because he's afraid of ghosts.
Do you have those superstitions?
What?
Do you have superstitions?
Well, I'm not sure you would call them superstitions. I believe that there are things, the mysterious things that we don't know and we don't understand. Uh-huh. But so I completely protected with all
Chain,
kinds
yeah,
of
right.
talismans.
See,
and
I sometimes
amulets
call this
and-
just being OCD.
Yes,
but-
no, and here's my evil eye, and
yeah.
you know, my Ganesh, and my, you know, all,
You answered my question.
so, but yes, and so, but those people, I think, well, we all have those superstitions.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's nobody who
There's a
doesn't
comfort in them.
have some. I mean,
Yeah.
you go to all the football games. The football players are all either have a cross, or they have a lucky something with them. Their lucky shoe or whatever. You know, I have a friend, when she drives long trips, she takes the Virgin Mary, a statue, and puts it down the front of her dress.
That could be dangerous.
People have
A
St.
quick
Christopher
stop.
medals, and you know, I mean, I
right.
think I'm wearing a buffalo nickel right now. My father was in Korea, and he was Buffalo Bill, and that was his nickname, and his regiment was the Buffaloes, and they were on the front lines, and they were getting killed every day, you know, but people were going AWOL all over Korea to join the Buffaloes because they had such esprit de corps, and my father sent away for buffalo nickels, and he got bags and bags of them. He gave every single soldier a buffalo nickel, and he said, keep it with you always for good luck, and don't ever not always have it for the rest of your life. And today, even, because there's still, the buffaloes still exist, today, even if I run into someone and he'll say, I'm a buffalo, I say, let me see your nickel. They always have it. Not one person has never had it. And then I pull out my nickel, you know.
Do you wear anything of Ben?
Well, this incredible ring,
Oh, yeah.
which took me 9 years to get out of him, but it was worth the wait. But you know, every time I look at this, I think, God bless Ben. You know, he really, you know, stepped up to the plate when it finally mattered.
Well, I think patience with Ben is a thread through the entire story of your relationship.
Yeah. But we were talking about the book and how I came to write the book. And so all of this time, I took a trip around the world to study the great faiths. And it was a huge eye-opener. For one thing, because I saw, and a lot of people who are religious, who are wedded to a certain institutional religion don't like this, but what I found was that basically all faiths start out the same, and it's all about the golden rule: do unto others as you will have others do unto you. And Karen Armstrong, who's a great friend and a religion scholar, wrote a book about the axial age and how there were these 4 great faiths that were started in different parts of the world where people had no contact with each other, and yet every single one of the faiths had that as their basic premise, or their basic tenet. And so what I did was, I mean, it was just fascinating to me, but I also saw things about every faith. We went to 13 countries.
Yeah, I read
what
your
I
whole
saw about
journey.
every faith had something that appealed to me, and then often a lot that did not appeal to me. So I kind of cherry-picked the things that I liked about various religions and faiths. And one of the things that I do like about so many faiths is their rituals. And I came to realize that ritual was hugely important in my life. And I had always, sort of rejected ritual as being kind of overly sort of sympathetic. I mean,
But
sort
don't you
of
think
mawkish.
entertaining friends, don't you think just something as expert as you are at dinner parties in their own way, that's a form of ritual?
Well, it is absolutely, and I write about this in the book.
So it was already there in your life
It was there,
in a way.
that's right.
Yeah.
But I mean, there were so many things so many light bulbs that went off in my
Revelations,
head,
yeah.
yes, while I was writing this book. And yes, I mean, my parents were great, they were great party people. And my father, we moved every year and a half of my entire life. I went to 22 different schools. And every time we moved, the day that we moved into a new set of quarters, my parents would have a dinner party. And Daddy was generally the commander. And there'd be packing crates everywhere. Mother would get out her big old pot, and she'd make a pot full of Johnny Mazzetti, which is noodles and tomatoes and cheese and hamburger. And she'd make a salad and brownies and a lot of booze. And people would sit on the floor in packing crates, and all these generals and colonels and everybody, and they would have a blast. And it was such a great way to Well, really to sort of bond with the new
Right.
people that you're going to be working with.
The rituals do that.
Well, and that's what the ritual was. And so I learned this from my parents. And I actually did a column for the website for a short period of time called The Sacred Table, because it was about how important entertaining is to me, and how I think that, first of all, you have to have people you like. I mean, people make all the difference. But to have people around your table and have candlelight, always candlelight, and a lot of wine and good food and great conversation. And I just like people to leave my house feeling elevated.
Right,
I want them to feel special. I want them to feel honored.
Happy.
And also it just creates a sense of community. I've always felt this in Washington too. One of the sad things about what's happening in Washington is that people just don't do that anymore. So that they don't get to know each other because of that.
I want to read something that I believe it's claimed to be a quote of yours, so I will see. It says, "You come in from another community and you don't know anything about the people. So you don't know what the perspectives they bring to something and what the relationships are and who's feuding and why. And all of that is extremely important information for people in the White House to know." And you were talking about another president of another era and why it was important that he integrate with the city. But I don't want to get away from your book for too long, but do you think it could make a difference with the Trump administration if there was more of an integration with the city?
No.
I like honesty. Because
Forget it.
Because
Well, I mean, 4% of the people in Washington voted for Trump. I mean, this is not Trump City here.
but when Reagan came in, it might have been.
Well, but people liked him. People liked him, and Katharine Graham was a great
Opened her
friend
door
of
to him.
Nancy's,
Yeah.
and she had a party for them when they first came here, and they brought people into the White House, and people in the Reagan administration were out everywhere, every night, and they mingled with, so there was, even though people disagreed with him politically, people didn't dislike him.
True.
And he was a decent person, and everybody liked him, and they became part of the community. Nancy reached out to Kay, and she became good friends with Meg Greenfield, who was the editor of the editorial page. Mm-hmm. But there was some sense of civility.
Relationship.
Well, but there was also some sense of civility.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think in this case, it's just not possible.
We could do a whole nother
Right.
show
That's
on
right.
how the city has changed.
Right, totally.
And the Capitol, the people in the Capitol Hill are like a state legislature,
Yeah.
and they're not here on the weekends
Right.
anymore, so there is no
No,
integration.
they're here Monday night to Thursday, and then they all
In
leave.
some
And so
cases, their wives don't even live here.
No, nobody lives here. They sleep on sofas in their offices.
I don't even know if they still have a Senate Wives Club
Right.
or anything like that, or Spouses Club. But back to right now, wouldn't you think that that's needed more than ever?
Yes, absolutely.
But
you can't.
but hopeless.
I mean, it's not possible. It
if you
just
were
isn't.
giving a dinner and the Trumps were coming, who would you invite?
Well, actually, David Ignatius was interviewing me recently, and he said, if you were having a dinner and you got word that Trump would like to come, would you invite him? Which was an even dicier question.
Yes, because the guest list
And
would
I
be
said,
set.
yeah. Well, what I said was, one of the things about Washington is that they always, it's really, people like to have some kind of access to power, and this has been extremely frustrating for a lot of social climbers in Washington who just can't
It's
bring
full stop.
themselves to
It's a full stop.
suck up. Or else they just don't have the access. But in fact, I think that it would. I like people when I have a big party to have meet people they don't know and have interesting, different
with whom
experiences.
They may not agree.
Yes, and so the answer is yes. And I think everyone in the room would be fascinated if he were there.
Of course.
So yeah. And I once said that the best kind of dinner party is if you have the president come for cocktails, and everybody gets to sort of hover around and talk to the president,
And then he
shake
leaves.
his hand and all of that, and then he leaves, and then you can spend the rest of the evening in the glow talking about him.
Right, that's the way Sunday shows work. They have the guest on, and then the guest leaves the set, and then the panel comes on, and then they dish about the guest.
Right, exactly.
So basically the same
So it's
thing.
the same thing. But anyway, who would I invite? I have, so many journalist friends. I think I would just pack them in.
So you think it'd be journalists principally? I think about right now, and the phrase keeps coming to me, social paralysis, that I feel that has kind of landed on the city, that nobody knows where to go, who to invite, what to do. I don't think about it too much because I don't think it's going to change, but it's unfortunate.
It might at some point. But I just to quote Caroline Casey, who's sitting right here, one of her great lines was, "Washington is a spiritual hardship post." and that is the truth, and that has not changed, and that never will change. But for me,
great quotes from great women.
Yeah, but for me, I think it's really important to continue the people who are here.
Yeah.
To continue to get together and get to know each other and have some sense of community, because there is a community. Well, look at all of you here. You're all part of the Washington community.
Right.
And so that's not going to go away. And this administration will go. The way I look at it, I've been covering it for so long. I've been here for so long. It's like they come and they go. And this one will go too, and somebody else will come in, and it'll be different.
And this is your home. And I imagine you think of yourself as a Georgetowner above all. But you have just sold the house that you and Ben shared for many years, Grey Gardens up in the Hamptons.
40 years. Yeah.
40 years. That was very special to you. And has it closed?
It'll close the end of this month, yeah. We have to do an estate sale first, which is on the 17th, 18th, and 19th.
And then you're done with that house.
Close, yeah.
And what ritual are you going to do for that goodbye?
Well, I didn't, that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about it. Everybody keeps saying, will you go up there for the estate sale? And the answer is no. I actually had lunch yesterday with the woman who was buying the house. And I just sort of...
Who you have not revealed who that is yet.
I can't.
But you're welcome to.
No, she doesn't want her name. It's not, you don't know her. But I basically, I guess in a way it was a ritual because I bequeathed the house to her. And I sent her a book of mine, and I told her that, the house was owned by Big Edie and Little Edie. And I put it on the market last January.
The aunts of
and it didn't, Jackie Kennedy's. And it didn't sell, and it didn't sell, and it didn't sell. And so finally, I thought, you know what? Big Edie does not want me to sell this house. So I took it off the market in Labor Day. And then I got 3 offers immediately, and she was one of them. And she is the one person who wants to preserve the house and who adores, who loves, doesn't want to tear it down, build a mega mansion. She wants to preserve it exactly as it is.
That's important.
And that was really important to me. And so I knew that she was the perfect buyer. And so, so it was kind of a ritual because I basically gave her my blessing that I turned the house over to her knowing that she would take care of it.
But when you walk out for the last time?
I went last January up to the house with the New York Times, and they were doing a piece on the sale. And of course, that's when I just put it on the market. And I just didn't feel anything because I'd been there the summer before. It was the first time I'd been there since Ben died, and it was horrible. I thought I could do it, but it was horrible. Without Ben, the magic was gone, and I didn't want to be there anymore. I could never recreate what we had together there. And
no, those are important decisions
It was
to
a
make.
time, it took me a long time to make the decision, but when I finally did, I felt somehow relieved. And last night I had a nightmare about selling it and having people come in and take all of my things. And I'm sure that there's a certain grief that I'm feeling now, but
you just don't want to see them again.
No, I don't want to be there again. I don't ever want to go there again. I don't ever want to see it again. I've said goodbye. I've said goodbye.
Well, and the house in St. Mary's?
Oh, that will keep.
You'll keep
That's
that,
Quinn's.
because that's Quinn's. And it's interesting, Sally. There's 2 things I thought. We've known each other for so many years. We don't even want to discuss. But in reading the book and just revisiting you, I'm thinking, A, why isn't she a Buddhist? And B, why doesn't she live in New Orleans? Because those things, it just seems like Buddhism would speak to you.
No, Buddhism does not speak to me.
Interesting, interesting. But you looked into it.
Oh yeah, I've studied Buddhism.
Yeah.
My brother is a practicing Buddhist, and I do meditate every day. But Buddhism
Did you have to learn how to do that?
You have to practice. You have to practice. You have to really be able to try to empty your mind. And at first, that's really hard. But after a while, you get better at it and better at it and better at it. And it does work.
Did you teach yourself?
Well, my brother
taught you.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And, I go, there's a woman named Tara Brock in Rockville, out in Maryland, who has meditation sessions, and I go there. But mostly I do it myself. I have a labyrinth in the country, where you walk the labyrinth, and it's a meditation tool, and I will go there. Sometimes I will just sit and meditate for a couple of hours in the center of the labyrinth. It's on a slope overlooking the water.
We have a very modest version of it down on the waterfront.
Yes, I walk that all the time.
But which is nice.
But the thing about Buddhism is that I find the problem with Buddhism it's too self-centered. It's all about yourself. It's all about reaching, nirvana or attaining moksha, which is, perfection or something. And the only way you can do that is to rid yourself of attachments, and that means attachments to other people. And so that just doesn't work to me at all, because my whole life is about being attached to people and loving people and taking care of people I love. So that doesn't work for me. And voodoo, I talk in my book about
growing up.
I'm from Savannah, Georgia, and my family, the McDougals, were Scottish Presbyterians who lived in a tiny town called Statesboro, and my Aunt Ruth was a great big white antebellum house, typical Southern old mansion, and my Aunt Ruth played the organ in the Presbyterian church. But she had a whole other religion, and so did everyone else in the family, and it was basically the occult, or occultism, as my brother likes to say. And so it was all about mystery, and so we practiced. They believed in the Scottish stones. They believed in time travel. They believed in psychic experiences and ghosts and tarot and astrology.
And you just grew up infused with that.
And voodoo and palmistry. And so that was all part of my life. It's what I call my embedded religion. It's like if you're Catholic and you're told that if you sin, you'll go burn in hell. And then you grow up and you don't really believe it, but on the other hand, you do something bad and you think, oh my God, I'm going to burn in hell. It's what you brought up with, that you sort of never really let go of it. And so, a lot of it I haven't. Obviously, astrology has been very important to me in my life. I love the tarot, I love palmistry. The house was haunted, so we had ghosts.
But ghosts don't scare you?
No, not at all. I've never met a
scary ghost,
an evil ghost or a scary ghost.
But I'm serious. It would seem to me that New Orleans would speak to you in some way.
Because
the French part.
Yeah, but the New Orleans is not the Deep South.
No, New Orleans
is very French in a lot of ways,
yeah.
And I don't feel at home in New Orleans the way I do in the
Savannah.
South. Yeah.
I want to go back to when you were away on your spiritual journey to all these different religious sites, spiritual sites, because it was an interesting moment in your relationship with Ben, because you left him for, I think, 3 weeks.
Yeah, and we'd never been apart that long.
He was beside himself.
Yeah, and
it was a real juncture.
Of course, at this point, he had not been diagnosed.
Right.
And it was about the time right before he was diagnosed.
Yeah.
And
it sort of prompted that to happen.
Yes, and but I had become so frustrated. I just thought, I need to get away from Ben. I need to get away from what's happening to us and really try to think about it. And it also came at a time, because it was right after I'd started the website. And so when he picked me up at the airport in a limousine with flowers, and he was so happy to have me back, and he was just very different with me after that. And I realized that he'd really missed me. And then, of course, he was diagnosed. And then I started reading about dementia, and I told Stephen, our shrink.
Did you have friends who had been through dementia? Did you know?
Well, his mother had it, and his brother had it. And so, but it was interesting. We went for the diagnosis, and we walked out of there, and he never mentioned it again. ever. We never, ever discussed
Never
it.
used that word.
No. And we never discussed plans about, I mean, he had wills and all that kind of thing. But, you know, you go to these, you watch these television ads, and it's the couple, the elderly couple, and they're going into the doctor, and they say that one of them has dementia, and they're holding hands, and then they go back and they're talking about it and all that. It was none of that. It was like, Ben had a great capacity for denial. I have zero capacity for denial. And Ben was just decided he was just going to live his life and be happy with his life, and that's the way it was going to be. And he, you know, but getting back to why the book, I finally did sign this book contract, and then it was about 2 years before he died, but he had a just sudden real decline, and I realized that I couldn't do anything. I was just so.
It was a job.
I had a job. I didn't hire a nurse or anything like that. I mean, we had a wonderful housekeeper, Carmen, who helped me look after him. But I slept in the bed with him, and I gave him a shower every night and taught him how to brush his teeth over and over again, and got him dressed and got him undressed, and took him down for his nap. And so I'd never left him for 2 years. And so it was not only it was time consuming, but I mean, even when he was napping, I just didn't have anything.
How did you find relief from that, though? That's such a stress on the caretaker, especially if you're the spouse as well. How did you?
Well, he was having blackouts. He had psychotic episodes where he would just be like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Well, talk about the time you came home. You had gone out to do something, and he tore apart your dressing room.
Well, it was the one time I had to go to New York for some work thing for my website.
Right.
And I went up for the night, and I came back, and my housekeeper was crazy, and I'd asked her to sleep on the sofa in the bedroom because I was worried about him getting up or wandering around or being scared if I wasn't there. And he refused to allow her in the bedroom. So she went and slept across the hall and kept the doors open to make sure that if there was a problem. And she didn't hear anything. And she came in the next morning and found my dressing room totally destroyed. I mean, the mirrors were cracked, the TV was turned over, the furniture was turned over, all of my clothes taken out of the closet on the floor, all of my medicine and cosmetics, everything. A metal lamp he had broken with his hands. And he was lying on the bed asleep in my clothes.
Yeah.
And he had absolutely no recollection of it at all. None.
But see, my point is,
so
yes.
I could never leave him again. Ever.
Right, but he doesn't remember it, but you do.
Yeah.
It's in you. You carry it around, and that's why How did you find the balance? Was it?
There are several things. I was doing an Alzheimer's conference with Maria Shriver in New York yesterday, and
his mother and father, or just her father?
Her father died of Alzheimer's. Yeah, but I mean, so we were talking about obviously caretaking as well as other issues. But for me, I did take care of myself. I really did. I continued seeing Stephen, which was hugely important. I saw Caroline, which was very important.
You used friends?
Yeah, I have an enormous number of friends who were just fantastic, but I also made sure to get 9 hours of sleep a night. And that was hard with Ben because he was sundowning then, which means that you get up at 3 in the morning and you get dressed. So I sometimes would have to take naps, but I made sure that I got enough sleep. I worked out every single day at Bar 3, which I still do. I still get 9 hours of sleep. I ate well.
These are such important lessons for anybody going through something like this.
But all of this is sort of obvious stuff.
Well, some people get completely overtaken by it.
I had a couple of glasses of wine at night. I did have friends over all the time because Ben loved having friends over, loved it. And I would put him next to me. He couldn't really carry on a conversation. But so I was having constant dinner parties. I mean, like 6 people or something like that. And they were close friends of his.
And they knew, so they...
And they knew. So, but it was really important that he be surrounded by friends and by
people. For a lot of people.
And that was a great relief for me because I felt like I wasn't alone. And of course, my son Quinn, who lived in the house attached to mine, was there every day and really helped me and helped me get through all of this. So, I mean, that was, but you know, one night, the summer before he died, he got a call from Jay Carney and said that President Obama wanted to give him, no, it was the summer before
Give him the Medal of Honor.
that he wanted to give him the Medal of Freedom.
Medal of Freedom.
And Jay said, you know, we're not announcing it for 2 weeks, so
Right, this is a great
make
story.
sure that Ben doesn't tell anybody. And Ben was thrilled out of his mind. And he didn't really care that much about honors, but he just was so excited. And so I said, okay, I promise we won't tell anybody. So we had a dinner party that night. Ben was at the table and he said, guess what? I'm getting the Medal of Freedom. So I had to call Jay and say, I'm sorry about this. But anyway, we got home to Washington. The Medal of Freedom was in November. Ben got up every single night at 3 o'clock in the morning
To get
and
ready.
got dressed. And I would say, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to the White House to get my medal. And I would have to get him undressed and put him back in bed, you know. But it was that kind of thing that went on. But the other thing is that that's when I began to draw on what I now see was my spirituality. And those last 2 years with Ben were the most spiritual 2 years of my entire life. And I was surprised by it because it's horrible. I mean, it's really horrible. And yet, there was this feeling. You know, one of the things that I write in the book is what gives your life meaning? What is the most important thing in your life? And I think we all try to find out. I had a video show called Divine Impulses, and I always used to ask people 2 questions: what or who is God to you, and what gives your life meaning? What is the sense of the divine? And I didn't know. I could never, if anybody asked me those questions, I could never have answered them myself. But I began to think about it and realize, and you know, when my book was due, I suddenly thought, I was hysterical, and I thought, I'm on deadline. I've got 2 months to figure out the meaning of life, and I've got to get it. But I did, for me. But this is not a self-help book. You know, this is not a how-to book.
No,
this is about what worked for me. And what I realized and what became clear to me was that taking care of first Quinn, who had open heart surgery, and by the way, Caroline saved his life by insisting the surgery be a week before they had planned it. Otherwise, and the doctors later said he would die if he hadn't had the surgery.
And everybody can sign up with Caroline at the end of the month.
But I still reserve the right to get an appointment with her when I want to, and not have to wait for 5 months. But so, I mean, and so he had learning disabilities all of his life, and I took care of him. I had to quit work for 16 years.
You still are.
Yeah, and
You
still
always
am
will.
because
Yeah.
he's still learning disabled.
Right.
And he's 35, he's thriving, he has a website for young adults with learning disabilities. He's engaged to a fabulous young woman. But he still needs help. And then my mother had a stroke, and for 12 years she was cognitively impaired and partially paralyzed, and she was here and I took care of her. And then my father got sick. He died first, and then my mother died, and then, you know, Ben got sick. And so, but that last 2 years of Ben, I started thinking, you know, I've never felt that fulfilled in my life. And, you know, I've loved my career. I've loved writing books. I've loved, you know, writing for the newspaper. It was thrilling. I loved going on television, all the things. But I never had that sense of being completely fulfilled and knowing what I was here for. And during that last 2 years with Ben, and oddly enough, we were together 43 years. Those were the happiest 2 years we ever spent together. We held hands, we kissed, and we went to La Samana in St. Martin, which I'm sad to say has probably been destroyed after the hurricane.
I hope not.
But we had gone there for over 40 years.
It's still there
and,
for you.
And no, I'll never go back there.
That's...
No.
I want to ask you about one thing.
But what I was saying is that last time we went alone. Usually we had gone with Quinn,
Right.
but I said, I think Dad and I need to have this time. And at that point, he was having a really hard time making conversation. And I hired a nurse to come and sit with him during the day while he slept or whatever, because I wanted to swim and walk on the beach and read on the beach, and I was afraid he would get lost or scared. But at night, we would go up to the terrace, as we always had, and we always had our seat right on the edge of the water, and it was so beautiful looking out in the moon and everything. And it was like Ben would just come to life. and we'd have 2 bottles of wine, and we would laugh and we would talk.
There's a grace in that.
And then we would go back, and then the next day he'd be completely out of it. And the last night we were there, he said, "This is the happiest week of my life, and I don't ever want it to end. You know, I just love you so much." And we walked back. He went to sleep, and that night I woke up and there was all this screaming and yelling and everything, and he'd had a psychotic episode and was trying to break into the neighbor's villa next door. But I mean, but those times where I can't tell you, even the last week of his life, the last 3 days of his life, when I literally stayed in the bed and held his hand the whole time, he was just so happy. And I felt so happy to be with him. And the last thing he said, I said to him, you know, he was sort of getting sleepy, and it was an evening, and I said, "I love you, Ben." And he said, "Me too, babe." And he closed his eyes and he never said another thing. For 2 more days he lived.
Yeah, but you.
And I held his hand the whole time, and I would say, "Ben, I'm going to the bathroom, so don't die until I come back." And I'd let go of his hand, and he would start going like this, and wouldn't stop until I came back. And then our anniversary was October 20th, so it'll be 3 years. It was 3 years this October, and I said, "You can't die on our anniversary," and he didn't. He waited till the next day.
But you say that was the last time you talked to him, but you go in the book into a part of how subsequent you have gone to a medium, which I think is very interesting, because I'm skeptical, you believe it, that you have talked to him through the medium.
Well, I had never talked to a medium. I'd never been to a medium. I never, you know, I always thought, I mean, we always used to play at having seances and all that, and Ouija boards. But I read, this is about a week before the Yahrzeit. I had it's a Jewish ceremony called Yahrzeit, but in German means year's time, in which you either unveil the headstone or you put the headstone down, and it marks the end of the year of mourning. And I had a ceremony at Oak Hill Cemetery because I had built a family mausoleum, and so I moved Ben's body out of the crypt in the chapel there. And about a week before the ceremony, somebody sent me this article by a woman named Lisa Chase, and she had been married to Peter Kaplan.
Right.
Peter Kaplan was the editor of the New York Observer, and a great guy. Everybody loved him, and he died of cancer. And she wrote the story about after she had, after Peter died, 2 friends who had somebody in their loved ones die, they called her and said, "We've been to this medium, and she was unbelievable, and we talked to the deceased." And she said, you know, she was a complete skeptic, and she had never been to an astrologer, never been to a psychic, never, you know, she didn't believe any of it. She thought it was total nonsense. But when you're in a state of grief, you will try anything, you'll do anything. And so she called this woman, and the woman said, you know, "Wait a minute, I'm talking to Peter." And the woman had no idea who Peter was. She just said, "My husband Peter died." And she started telling, "Peter's saying this to you and that to you," and I mean, nicknames they had for each other and what they called their child and things they said to each other that nobody knew. And she was just undone. And she didn't even have a notepad. She said she was running around writing on napkins and backs of envelopes. And then she decided to do a piece on this woman, and then she talked to a lot of people in hospice care who said they believe in this. And she talked to the woman a couple more times and spent about a year talking to her, and then ended up writing this piece about how, you know, whatever you want to believe or whatever you want to think, this is my experience, and all I can tell you is that she told me these things that blew me away because no one else
And
could
then
know. So I called her and got the number of this woman, and I called her and I said, "My husband died. His name is Ben." And she said, "He's telling me that he doesn't want to talk to you right now. He thinks that you should get through this ceremony."
Put you on hold.
Yeah. But she said, "Wait, he's saying something, right?" She said, "Does the name Frank Rich mean anything to you?" And I said, "Well, you know, Frank Rich was the movie critic for the New York Times and is a writer, and his wife were acquaintances of ours. I mean, we knew them, but we weren't close. I hadn't seen them in 5 years. But the week before, at a screening for a documentary on Richard Holbrooke in New York, an HBO screening, I had sat next to Frank and his wife. And I was telling them about Ben's mausoleum and the art site that I was having. They're Jewish, and so I thought they would be particularly interested. They were fascinated and wanted to know everything. And she said, Ben says that you were in New York and you were sitting at dinner with Frank Rich. And you were telling him about the mausoleum, and he said, "I just am so he wants you to know how honored he is that you were doing this for him, and he's so happy about it." And he said, "And tell her I was with her all night long."
And on that note,
I just get goosebumps talking about it.
And you know, and it's all in here. And unfortunately, our time is up because I think we all agree we could just go on and on. But you've got to get the book, not because of just everything we've been talking about here, but also to go on with the medium and hear about Ben hanging out with Jack and Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
But that's.
But
all
I just can I say one more thing? One more thing, which is that, you know, Ben was in this Harvard study, and they studied these guys, Jack Kennedy too, called the Grant Study. Mm-hmm. And they studied them through their lives. They answered questionnaires all the way through their lives. And at the end, most of them are dead now. He wrote a book, this guy, George Valiant, and he said, the one thing conclusion I came to is that the one thing that matters in life, and the only thing that will give you happiness, is love. And that's what came through to me, and so that's what gives my life meaning, certainly.
Well, that's a perfect end note. Finding magic. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sally.